Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, grading the grid, the power grid, that is. What does the future hold for American energy? It's a politically fueled debate, with proponents of the Green New Deal on one side working to mitigate the impact of climate change and environmental effects through alternative energy sources, while others want to put the brakes on that movement, or at least slow it down, claiming many of the alternative energy solutions overall are flawed and could be disastrous. Tonight we have three experts weighing in on this important issue, including two guests who have teamed up for a first-of-its-kind national energy report card. But first, we would like to hear from you to help drive the conversation here on the show. You can do that via social media, on Facebook. You can email us. You can dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinion or suggest future show topics. And if you'd like to watch any of our previous shows this season, you can log on to deltapublicmedia.org. Now for tonight's guests, we have Jason Hayes, Director of Energy and Environmental Policy for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. And we also have Peter Sinclair from the Yale Climate Connections, specializing in climate change and renewable energy issues. They're in studio. Joining us virtually, Dr. Timothy Nash, Vice President Emeritus at Northwood University and the Director of the university's McNair Center for the Advancement of Free Enterprise and Entrepreneurship. So that is a mouthful. So glad to have you all here. So you've got this energy buffet, I'm going to call it. You go through the line, lots of items to choose from, including your old favorites like coal, petroleum, nuclear. But they're losing a little popularity due to the higher costs and considered not great long-term for the environment. On the other hand, you've got relatively newer items, let's say wind, solar, hydroelectric, geothermal to choose from. Let's not forget natural gas. And the new kid on the block may be hydrogen. There's a lot to choose from. We're all looking for energy that's reliable, feasible, cost-effective, and minimize the impact on the environment and humans. That's a long laundry list. So Jason and Dr. Nash, let me just start with you. You've done this grading the grid, this National Energy Report Card. We've got a graphic to show the viewers some of the energy sources that you used, that you graded. Why don't you go through that with us? It's up on the screen. You can go from bottom to top, top to bottom. Go ahead, Jason.
Sure. Natural gas, we gave an A grade. Largely, there were several reasons, but it's low cost. There's lots of innovation going on in its use, like how we're getting it out of the ground using fracking and things like that. It has a lesser environmental impact than do other hydrocarbons like coal and petroleum because it produces less emissions when you combust it to make electricity. It's got a strong market demand. That is, customers are asking for it. It does not need to be subsidized. It doesn't have to be mandated. So when those were a few of the kind of the metrics that we used to grade the different energy sources. And so we also looked at nuclear. We graded it a little bit lower than natural gas because primarily the biggest issue that it faces is just leftovers from the 1970s, this notion that we should be afraid of nuclear, when in reality nuclear is our safest and most reliable of energy sources. It is expensive to build it, but once it's up and running, it can run, a nuclear plant can run for 60, 80, or even 100 years. And so you can defray that cost over an extremely long period of time. For those that are worried about climate change, it has zero CO2 emissions. So it's much, much cleaner than pretty much any other energy source. For hydroelectric, we said it is extremely reliable. It's a renewable resource. Part of the challenge that it faces is that you have to build big dams to get it to work. And so getting new hydroelectric permitted would be extremely difficult in today's world. It's unlikely to happen. In fact, in places like Pacific Northwest, there are many that are working to have the dams removed and torn out. So geothermal is limited because it's just difficult to get to. While it is renewable, when it's up and running, it's very reliable. It can be a base load energy source, but it's just like it's a niche. Typically, you have to have that energy source close to the surface to be able to drill down to it to get to it. So it's less likely to be produced in the Northeast or the Midwest or something like that. Wind and solar, we gave an F for a variety of reasons, because they are having increasing impacts in terms of grid reliability. They are, whether or not people recognize it, they are actually expensive to build and operate, especially because you have to overbuild and do things like curtailment. When you have a bright sunny day or a windy day, you're overproducing, so you have to curtail and shut them down. Mm-hmm. The rest of the time you have to overbuild them to be able to produce enough. Coal, we gave a B. The biggest challenge coal is facing is, as you already noted, environmental impacts. It produces CO2 when you burn it, double the amount that you get from natural gas. But we have the technologies to address that. We can put scrubbers and bag houses and all that sort of thing on coal plants. We know how to do it. Also, we're in Michigan right now, in Lansing, you're seeing things like a push for carbon capture and storage. So we have technologies to deal with those environmental impacts. And the last one, petroleum, we graded a C+ because it, again, is a niche market. It's very small. It's unlikely to get much more built. So that's a kind of a long-winded way. I don't want to take up the entire program, right. But going through that list quickly, that's what we did.
So Dr. Nash, why don't you weigh in on the research that you teamed up with Jason on? Did you go into it with sort of preconceived ideas, preconceived notions, and then were there some surprises? And then on top of that, what was sort of the goal of this study? You were hoping to get traction in terms of sort of overall energy policy, so maybe address all of that when you think about that.
Well, yeah, I would say, number one, Jason did a great job summarizing the report card. When you look at the 8 areas that we graded, you noted hydrogen. Hydrogen is also an up-and-coming opportunity, I think, for fueling, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that in the time allotted. The thing that I would add is that we're not saying any of these sources do not make sense. It's just that I think part of the problem with, in our opinion, with solar and wind is that we're pushing it a lot faster than the technology is capable of providing things in the most cost-effective, most environmentally effective way, number one. And then number two, when you look at a number of instances, we took a close look at a number of states. For example, Ohio. Ohio dramatically has shifted in the last 25 years from producing most of its electricity from coal to producing the majority of its electricity from natural gas. And they, along with the United States, realized a dramatic decline in our carbon footprint. So I think that when you look at the what we should do and how we should decide what is the mix in terms of the grid, we would argue very strongly that the market should determine that, and that the market right now, if left to its own analysis, would be choosing a lot more natural gas and a lot more nuclear than currently is the case.
So Jason, I want to follow up with you because in your report, kind of in the summary, I think you made the statement, a claim overall that energy policy should be based on facts, not hopes and dreams. Can you expand on that statement and how the report sort of validated that?
Sure. As we're looking at the fact part of it is people need energy to do what we do, to survive, to thrive, to flourish. And so when you look at situations where reliable and affordable energy is not available, you see things like what happened in Texas in February 21 during Winter Storm Uri. The state did not have reliable energy. And what happened? 211 people died. Okay, that's a serious issue. And so when we encounter increasing instability in our grid, and it's not just me, it's not just Tim that's saying that. You have grid operators, you have the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, you have the group that manages and oversees Michigan's grid. It's called MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. All of these grid operators are telling us we are rushing the decarbonization push. We're moving, like Tim said, faster than the technology is able to do the work. And so what's happening is it's destabilizing our grid and potentially putting people in a dangerous situation. When it's -20 in Michigan and the snow's falling and it's cloudy and there's no wind blowing, we need something to provide reliable electricity. And people will often say, well, it's okay, we'll just build batteries. Okay, well, batteries are expensive, and the industry standard is 4 hours. So if we build enough wind to charge up our batteries, then we only have 4 hours. Or if we build more batteries, okay, then you're adding to the expense. But you can go for periods of days or even weeks. Just this week in the state of Washington, they had their wind resource drop to 0 or near 0 for 9 days. So if 4-hour batteries are the standard, how many times do you have to rebuild the system with 4-hour batteries to have sufficient electricity to keep people alive for 9 days? It's expensive. So what you end up doing is you have to build the system twice. And you end up building gas and nuclear. Where sometimes it's almost impossible today to build new coal. So maybe you can keep existing coal plants open for a little bit longer until you have small modular nukes or something like that to take up that spot. But we need, as a nation, as a society, to have reliable and affordable electricity. If you don't have it, it becomes dangerous.
So Peter, do you want to jump in any of this?
Anytime.
So
Yeah.
as you looked at, let's go back to the report card and some of the grades that some of these energy sources were given. What area do you have the biggest problem with? I'm guessing wind and solar is an area you've got a big problem.
The grades that are given here bear no resemblance to what markets and prices are actually telling us. And this is, a common failing with the Mackinac Center that claims to be a market-based organization. The market is buying this year 90% renewable energy, solar and wind. And those energy forms are coming in cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and you only have to look at the actual price that people are paying. Actually, the top 11 states in terms of penetration of renewable energy, 7 of them are deep red Republican states, and 10 out of the 11 are in the top 20 cheapest states insofar as what people are actually paying for their electricity. So you take the example of, let's compare like Michigan and Iowa. They're both in the northern Midwest. They're climatologically similar. Iowa is getting between 70 and 80% of its electricity from primarily wind. There's some solar coming in. Michigan is 85% coal, gas, and nuclear. So if we believe the talking points here, then Iowa should be a zombie apocalypse of high electricity rates and low reliability. But what are the actual figures? In fact, Iowa rates among the top 10 states in electric grid reliability. Michigan is a sad 43rd among states, okay? Iowans pay 14 cents a kilowatt hour for residential electricity. Michigan pays 20, and I just checked those numbers with the EIA last week. So we're paying 35% more for energy that is much dirtier, that is killing people, that is making the Great Lakes so that we can't eat the fish out of it. and that is adding to climate change, which is, yes, I am one of those people that believes in climate change, as does the overwhelming scientific community. So the point is, the real markets, real prices do not support the grading that, that he's got here. And I'll just make a few other comments. He's way behind on geothermal. You know, I've interviewed Wilson Ricks at Princeton and Daniel Cohen at Rice University and Michael Weber at University of Texas. You should really, you know, check out what's going on in geothermal, because we have learned from the fracking industry how to drill really, really deep with great precision. And I think we all know that if you go deep enough, just anywhere on the planet, you're going to run into hot rocks.
Okay.
And so we are now seeing geothermal, what is called advanced geothermal or enhanced geothermal plants built that will take use of these drilling technologies. And theoretically, we're actually seeing some of these built right now. We've had some small-scale plants that are successful. We're seeing some good-sized utility-scale plants being built as we speak. And so enhanced geothermal is going to be a competitor to nuclear, the new generation of nuclear that we're told, we're promised is going to come sometime in the 2030s. Insofar as...
well, why don't we leave it at that for now? Jason
Yeah, sure.
and or Tim, do you want to touch on...
So if you read the paper,
Yeah.
you'll see that we touch on enhanced geothermal and say that it's a promising new development, but as is often the case, scaling is the issue. Right now, the United States is the largest consumer of geothermal or producer of electricity with geothermal on the planet, but we produce less than 1% of our electricity supply with geothermal. So yes, it's a niche market. Yes, there's promising new research coming out, but that doesn't mean that we can just flick a switch and tomorrow we're going to be using geothermal. So there are research tests that are going in. Google and Fervo Energy just produced one in the Southwest, and they're seeing promising results. So bully for them, good.
Right.
We should do more of that. But that, again, doesn't mean that we can run our system on it. So that's why we gave the grade that we did.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean...
Well, there's more. There's more that I wanted to speak to, because I did read the paper, and on page 37 and 38, you touched on something you mentioned here, which was the Storm Uri in Texas, which cost so many lives back in 2021. Mm-hmm. We're actually seeing more and more storms like that. It is a feature of climate change that is highly destructive and is only going to become more so in coming years, according to the scientists that I've been talking to. But important for that particular event, what you didn't say, but what, to your credit, you did say in your paper, you quoted the definitive study on that came out of the University of Texas, and they said that 40% of the gas infrastructure in Texas went down. And it went down because of a cascading series of failures. The electricity went down. They couldn't pump the gas out of the ground and through the pipelines. The pipelines froze. There was less electricity, so they were less able to pump, so it's a cascading failure.
Right.
And and I was watching that event in real time by observing like WFAA in Dallas and KHOU in Houston. And I watched the governor of Texas admit to the gathered journalists, who he knew he couldn't lie to, that the nuclear plant was down. South Texas nuclear plant went down. 40% of their gas went down. They had coal plants going down. Sure, there were some wind turbines froze because in Texas they don't make anybody weatherized wind turbines. All around them, all through Iowa had the same storm, no problems. So the point is, they talk about in their paper that there is a huge vulnerability of natural gas, particularly in the kind of cold polar vortex extremes that we're seeing more of. And they suggest that the solution is to build massive gas storage tanks on site. In other words, energy storage.
Right. Well, I suggest that the viewers read the paper.
Sure.
I think it's well done, well documented, well researched. I know there's some debate about it, but for people like you that want to go ahead and look at it, go to their site, mackinaccenter.org. It's on there. They can look through it and come to their own conclusions. One area I wanted to jump into, because you and Jason and Tim are working on something new that'll probably come up in the first quarter about EVs, electric vehicles. And it's certainly germane to this conversation, particularly when you think about sort of the Biden administration kind of issued a lot of tax incentives, mandates for electric vehicle production. Some automakers obviously are buying into that. They've pivoted a little bit, although some are pulling back because there has not been the robust consumer sales of EVs. So where are your thoughts on where that might be going here in the next administration, and how does sort of like the apprehensiveness of consumers, because we're concerned about the energy grid, we're concerned about the reliability of my EV, particularly if I'm driving it during a snowstorm.
Right.
So kind of address that, teasing what you're going to have in the first quarter on EVs and what you guys see happening here in the next year in this new administration and a shift in maybe energy policy.
Sure. Did you want to start on this, Tim?
Sure. Well, what I would also suggest, maybe make this a segue from what Peter just said to EVs. And a good friend of mine runs one of the world's largest beer distributorships out of New York City. And not too long ago, about a year ago, he decided to convert all of his delivery trucks to natural gas. And he decided that, you can get natural gas right at the big warehouse. And they converted their vehicles from diesel and gasoline to natural gas. And when they went through the inspector's check for the state of New York, what they found out was that the inspector was just flabbergasted by the fact that there was no carbon pollution that the measuring devices could measure coming out of the vehicle. So I think the thing that's important to note is not to say that there isn't a place for solar, that there isn't a place for wind. I think what's important is that we allow the application across a number of areas. And when it comes to EVs, one of the big issues that we face, gentlemen, is the $36.2 and growing trillion U.S. national debt. And we have spent, between automobiles and wind and solar, we have spent hundreds of billions, closing in on $1 trillion, with a lot of subsidies for wind and solar that Peter's not talking about being allocated for the future. And as we look at it, the paper that we're coming out with on electric vehicles, again, is not saying there's no place for electric vehicles, but that the market did not adopt electric vehicles. We pushed electric vehicles way too quickly. The number of vehicles that were supposed to be adopted by this point are far behind the original projections. If you look at the fact that fewer people are now saying they want to buy an electric vehicle, if you look at 40% of the electric vehicles that were most recently traded in, they were traded in for ICE vehicles. And if you look at 78% of all electric vehicle owners own a second vehicle that's an ICE engine vehicle for long distance traveling. So there's a lot of problems associated with the electric vehicles that the market still has to deal with. And my final comment on it would be that as we look at, or as we think about some of the different issues, I think what's important is that we are going to need everything we have, in our opinion, as it relates to natural gas, petroleum, nuclear, just to power the grid as we look at the new changes and needs for AI, for the big data centers, for cryptocurrencies, and many other needs that we haven't even projected. So right now, our grid capacity versus expected demand is way behind where we want to be. And it would take incredible amounts of government subsidies to ever try to produce the wind and the solar to meet that demand in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and on those topics, the markets that Peter talked about before, the reason that wind and solar are getting built, Warren Buffett said it best: you build wind because of the tax credits. They don't get built if you aren't getting the tax credits. So yes, people are building, or companies are building more wind and solar, but it's because government is paying 30% plus of the cost of getting it done. So it's not difficult to compete when Big Brother in DC is paying your bills. And same sort of thing with, as Tim just said about EVs, they're getting built. A lot of demand that's associated with that is related to mandates, not customer demand. And so that's the big thing that we talk about. There are other issues related to, are they really as clean as people are saying they are? After 5 years plus, you can even out the embedded CO2 emissions. The different models have different mileages, but on average, 3 to 5 years you need before you break even on embedded CO2. There's a bunch of other things, but again, at the core, the nut of the argument is, are people asking for these things? And generally the answer is no. The reason that we're selling more of these is because of government action, not customer demand.
If I may.
You got about 30 seconds. Yeah.
Well, okay, so yeah, the notion that fossil fuel industry is not receiving massive subsidies is nonsense. Not to mention the occasional $6 trillion war for oil that we're forced to fight on behalf of the oil industry. But also, I would say, in terms of electric vehicles, the most recent survey I've seen is that the majority of global auto buyers expect that their next vehicle will be an electric or plug-in hybrid. Those are simply the facts, and it's coming. So
I'll leave it at that. Gentlemen, thank you. Wish I could have gone longer. It's a great discussion. Thanks for coming in tonight. Thank you, the viewers. We'll see you back here next week. Have a great night. Appreciate it. Well, welcome to the follow-up after show, our web extra, the viewers who caught the big show, and now we're doing the after show because there was a heck of a lot more to talk about when you're talking about these energy issues with our guests, and our guests remain for the after show. Jason Hayes, Director of the Energy and Environmental Policy of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Peter Sinclair from Yale Climate Connections, specializing in climate change and renewable energy issues, and Dr. Timothy Nash, Vice President Emeritus of Northwood University and the Director of the university's McNair Center for the Advancement of Free Enterprise and Entrepreneurship. In the big show, we had a lot to talk about, plenty more to talk. And in the after show, Dr. Nash, why don't you have at it? I think you were sort of challenging Peter with some of his thoughts and the economic side of mandates and incentives. So have at it.
No, I've really appreciated Peter's comments, and again, that dinner stands. My point is that when you look at all of the revenue provided at the state, the local, state, and federal government by the oil and natural gas industries, they provide net billions and billions of dollars to the economy. And because they may get a little back here and there, the argument cannot be compared with the fact that the overall negative subsidies to wind and solar to date are astronomical, and these are things we can't afford with a $36.2 trillion national debt that's growing. And the other point that I would make is, if Peter would like to see last year's trade figures and look at our trade deficit with China, one of the largest single components in the billions and billions of dollars were all the equipment for wind and for windmills, wind turbines, solar panels, et cetera, from China. And that is something we also outline in the paper, that it is something we ought to worry about, being dependent on China for these types of key components of our economy.
Well, I'll just jump in on that. So being dependent, first of all, as I mentioned before, we're only buying about 1% of our solar panels from China right now. That's by law. We're getting the vast majority of the rest of them from places like Malaysia and Vietnam, India perhaps, and we're building a domestic solar energy industry at a rapid rate. We are onshoring a lot of manufacturing in this country, and that's, of course, one reason why we're going to need more energy. But the subsidy that we pay to the fossil fuel industry is not just the subsidy that we pay in dollars. 7 million people a year die from the health effects of burning fossil fuels every year. Okay? Many of them are Americans. We are paying their health care costs. We are paying in the cost of low birth weight, delayed development, asthma, cardiac disease, lung disease, premature death, dementia. These are all the result of burning fossil fuels. Okay, so when we stop burning fossil fuels, we get not just the benefit of a low carbon energy source. We create a healthier environment. The reason our kids can't go fishing in our lakes in Michigan is largely because of mercury contamination that comes from coal plants, okay? But that nature can heal. Nature can get better if we stop battering it, okay, with these kind of pollutants. Moreover, we have, after you've had your oil well, after you've had your frack well, we have hundreds of thousands of what are called abandoned or orphaned wells. There may be millions of them because they haven't been adequately cataloged, and they can cost anywhere from tens of thousands to millions of dollars to adequately cap so that they won't leak toxic chemicals and greenhouse gases into the environment. That's something that taxpayers will either have to bear the financial burden of, or we will have to bear the health and environmental burdens of not dealing with it. So when we get into this discussion about the cost of fossil fuels, all too often the effects to human beings and the effects to nature are written off the books by economists as collateral damage. They're not counted, they're not recognized, and I think that's wrong. And I think it's an injustice to our children. And I just had my first grandchild, and I have a sense of urgency about this that I have never had before. So I'd just like you to consider that. I don't think you have been.
Okay, so building on that, if we're concerned about abandoned wells and that sort of things, are we equally concerned about the tens of thousands of wind turbines that are going up over that are leaking, to use language that Peter would recognize, PFAS infused microplastics into the soil? We're putting up, the same sort of thing from solar panels that use many of the same, cadmium telluride, the deadly toxic heavy metals that all you need is one hailstorm to come through and smash thousands of acres like just happened in Texas.
I'm going to have to stop you right there.
No, you don't. I sat quietly and let you speak.
Let him finish his point.
You don't get to run the show.
What he's saying is utter nonsense.
So if you are
Right,
actually worried about those things, then you would be worried about that too. You would also be worried about the size of the mining operations that we rely on. Places like the cobalt comes from Democratic Republic of the Congo that uses child labor to dig most of the world's supply of cobalt out of the ground so that we can build our EVs and our batteries and our battery backups for the utilities. We would be worried about the refining of rare earth minerals, which is done in the Xinjiang region in China. So all of these same sort of attacks you can lay at the foot of wind and solar, just the same as you can lay at the foot of any other industry. So the difference, though, is that wind and solar do not provide basically half of the fertilizer that we use to feed people on the planet, whereas natural gas does. So while there are costs associated with using natural gas, there are massive benefits too. And Peter's side of the argument tends to forget those benefits and concentrate only on the costs. So if you're going to play the economics game, you have to play it fairly, and you have to look at both costs and benefits. So if you're going to play the game, you got to play the whole game.
May I?
Yeah.
Okay, so there are no PFAS chemicals coming off of solar panels. You can talk to Dr. Anik Akhtel at Michigan State University. I interviewed scientists Josh Rhodes up at Michigan Tech University. You can find those interviews on my website. This idea that the poor children in Africa are mining cobalt. You know, we were mining cobalt for decades to refine gasoline. And I never heard a word out of the Mackinac Center about the poor children in Africa until EVs became a significant threat to the oil and gas business case. Suddenly there is a concern.
We're using more oil and gas today than we ever have. You said that yourself.
That did not exist before. And as far as you mentioned cadmium telluride, this is elementary chemistry. You know, sodium chloride. That's two very toxic metals, but together as a compound, they make up the table salt that we put on our eggs. Cadmium and tellurium may have some toxicity themselves, but when you put them together as cadmium telluride, they become basically an inert, insoluble compound that has negligible toxicity. And at least according to the best experts that I've talked to at the National Renewable Energy Lab, there has never been a case of any kind of soil contamination from solar panels anywhere in the United States.
I think I'll leave it at that. But just in terms of Jason and Dr. Nash, if people want to read more about the studies that you're doing, the one on grading the grid and looking to the first quarter on the EVs, they can go where?
To either the Mackinac Center's website or Northwood University's McNair Center website. They'll be on both places.
And Peter, if they want more information on you and who you're affiliated with?
My blog is thinc.blog. Also, you can check out sun101.info, sun101.org or wind101.info.
Okay. Guys, thank you for the discussion. I wish I had a lot more time to do it. It was fascinating. Appreciate the opportunity, and we'll do it again. A lot more to talk about.
Look forward to it.
And thank you for joining us on the After Show.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And make sure to click that bell icon to stay notified when we upload new content. Videos like this are only possible because of viewers like you. To help support this channel, click on the link in the description below. We'll see you next time.